Before Hollywood learned how to speak, Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer learned how to command attention. Long before streaming algorithms and cinematic universes, there was a single promise etched into a roaring lion and a Latin motto, ars gratia artis, art for art's sake. It wasn't just a slogan. It was a declaration of intent. MGM set out to define what movies were supposed to be: grand, polished, emotionally satisfying, and large in the lives watching them. In an era when America was still inventing itself, MGM offered certainty. Its films presented worlds where love triumphed, heroes endured, and beauty was never accidental. Every frame was designed to feel expensive. Every story carefully shaped to leave audiences reassured rather than shaken. MGM didn't chase realism. It chased myth. And in doing so, it quietly taught generations how to feel about cinema itself. Behind the scenes, this wasn't magic. It was machinery. Writers, directors, composers, and stars were assembled into a tightly controlled storytelling engine, one that valued consistency over chaos and elegance over experimentation. While other studios flirted with risk, MGM refined perfection. Its films didn't ask audiences to question the world. They invited them to escape it. Yet the story of MGM is more than glamour and gold statues. It's a story of control and compromise, of creativity flourishing inside boundaries, and of a studio so powerful it shaped not only the films of its time, but the expectations of every film that followed. To understand MGM is to understand why movies still look the way they do, why spectacle still matters, and why. Even today, cinema continues to chase the feeling MGM mastered nearly a century ago. This is the story of Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, Hollywood's most elegant illusion, and the storytelling empire that taught the world how to dream in widescreen. Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer was not born from inspiration, but from consolidation. In 1924, three struggling companies, Metro Pictures, Goldwyn Pictures, and Louis B. Mayer Productions, were merged under the financial backing of Marcus Lowe, a theater magnate who understood one essential truth: films are only as powerful as their distribution. By uniting production with exhibition, MGM was designed from the start to dominate both the screen and the box office. At the center of this new studio stood Louis B. Mayer, a man who believed movies should reflect idealized values rather than uncomfortable truths. Mayer viewed cinema as a moral influence, capable of shaping public behavior, and he demanded stories that reinforced stability, romance, and clear emotional resolution. Under his leadership, MGM avoided gritty realism in favor of polished narratives where order was restored and virtue was rewarded. Unlike its competitors, MGM invested heavily in permanence. Massive sound stages, permanent backlots, and long-term talent contracts turned filmmaking into an industrial process. Writers didn't simply tell stories. They engineered them. Scripts were refined through committees, dialogue polished, endings tested, and emotional beats carefully timed. This wasn't chaos or creativity run wild. It was precision storytelling, designed to deliver consistent emotional impact. From the beginning, MGM positioned itself as Hollywood's prestige studio. Its films were marketed as quality pictures, distinguished by elegant costumes, orchestral scores, and stars presented as cultural icons rather than mere performers. The studio wasn't trying to reflect everyday life. It was selling an elevated version of it, one where audiences could believe in glamour, destiny, and cinematic perfection. By the late 1920s, MGM had already separated itself from the rest of Hollywood. It wasn't just producing movies, it was defining standards. And in doing so, it laid the foundation for a storytelling philosophy that would dominate American cinema for decades to come. At MGM, scale was never an afterthought. It was the story itself. The studio believed that emotion was amplified by grandeur, that love felt deeper when framed by towering sets, sweeping landscapes, and swelling orchestral scores. Spectacle wasn't used to distract audiences from narrative. It was used to elevate it. Every visual choice was engineered to make stories feel monumental, even when they were deeply personal. Epic productions like Ben-Hur and The Great Ziegfeld demonstrated MGM's philosophy in full force. These films weren't content to simply unfold. They announced themselves. Massive sets, hundreds of extras, and meticulous production design turned character arcs into myths. The struggles of individuals became reflections of history, destiny, and national identity. MGM understood that when audiences witnessed something larger than life, they felt something larger than themselves. This approach extended beyond epics into dramas and romances. Even intimate stories were dressed in elegance. Costumes were immaculate, lighting softened faces, and camera movement was designed to flatter rather than confront. MGM films rarely looked accidental. The studio favored clarity over chaos, beauty over rawness, and emotional certainty over ambiguity. In a world defined by economic depression and global instability, MGM offered reassurance through visual control. Music played a crucial role in the spectacle. MGM invested heavily in in-house composers and full orchestras, using music not merely as background but as emotional architecture. Scores guided audiences on how to feel, when to hope and when to mourn. Silence was rare. Emotion was never left unattended. Every beat was scored, every climax underscored, every ending resolved with musical finality. Through spectacle, MGM created trust. Audiences knew that when they entered an MGM film, they would be rewarded with polished payoff and emotional closure. This consistency became the studio's greatest strength, and eventually one of its limitations. But at its peak, MGM didn't just show stories. It staged them, turning cinema into a grand ceremony rather than a fleeting experience. At MGM, stars were not discovered, they were designed. The studio understood that audiences didn't just follow stories, they followed people. And so MGM built the most meticulously controlled star system Hollywood had ever seen, transforming actors into symbols of emotion, aspiration, and fantasy. These stars weren't simply cast in films. They were the films. Under long-term contracts, performers' appearances, public behavior, and even personal lives were carefully managed. Hairlines were adjusted, accents softened, and personas refined until each star embodied a specific narrative promise. Clark Gable represented rugged charm and moral certainty. Greta Garbo became the embodiment of mystery and restrained desire. Judy Garland carried innocence and vulnerability, while Gene Kelly personified optimism through movement. When audiences bought a ticket, they weren't just watching a new story. They were returning to a familiar emotional relationship. This system shaped MGM storytelling from the inside out. Scripts were written to serve stars, not the other way around. Characters were tailored to reinforce established screen identities, ensuring consistency across films. Conflict rarely challenged a star's core persona. Instead, it tested and ultimately reaffirmed it. MGM understood that predictability, when paired with excellence, created comfort, and comfort created loyalty. The studio's marketing machine amplified this illusion. Fan magazines, publicity photos, and carefully staged interviews blurred the line between performer and character. Stars lived in MGM's carefully constructed dream world both on and off screen. This continuity strengthened audience attachment, but came at a cost. Creative freedom was limited, and deviation from a star's assigned image was often discouraged or outright denied. Yet for decades, the system worked. MGM stars became global icons, their faces and voices synonymous with Hollywood itself. The studio had mastered a powerful truth. Storytelling didn't end when the film faded to black. At MGM, the story continued through the star, endlessly familiar, endlessly reassuring, and endlessly marketable. If MGM had a heartbeat, it was music. More than any other studio, MGM understood that song and movement could carry emotion where words could not. Its musicals weren't interruptions to the story. They were the story, built on the belief that joy, longing, and transformation could be expressed most honestly through rhythm and motion. During the 1930s and 1940s, as the world outside theater struggled through economic collapse and global war, MGM offered something rare: controlled optimism. Films like The Wizard of Oz, Meet Me in St. Louis, and later Singin' in the Rain created worlds where hardship existed, but never without hope. Color, melody, and choreography worked together to reassure audiences that order and happiness were always within reach. MGM's musical storytelling was engineered with precision. Songs were placed at emotional turning points. Choreography designed to reveal character rather than distract from it. Gene Kelly danced with athletic confidence, turning movement into personality. Judy Garland sang with emotional openness, allowing vulnerability to become narrative truth. Even fantasy was grounded in sincerity. No matter how elaborate the set or how surreal the moment, the emotion had to feel real. Technicolor became one of MGM's most powerful storytelling tools. Color wasn't decorative. It was psychological. Emerald greens, warm yellows, and deep blues guided emotional response, reinforcing themes of home, longing, and self-discovery. In The Wizard of Oz, the transition from sepia to color wasn't just visual, it was narrative, signaling a shift from reality into possibility. Through its musicals, MGM perfected escapism without emptiness. These films didn't deny the existence of pain or uncertainty. They reframed them. Problems were danced through, sung aloud, and ultimately resolved. For audiences seeking relief, MGM musicals didn't offer escape from emotion. They offer escape through emotion, making hope feel not naive, but earned. For all its elegance, MGM's perfection was carefully enforced. Beneath the immaculate sets and sweeping music lay one of the most rigid studio systems in Hollywood history. Creativity at MGM did not operate freely. It operated within boundaries. Directors, writers, and actors worked under strict supervision, where deviation from the studio's carefully curated image was rarely encouraged and often corrected. Scripts passed through layers of approval, shaped to align with MGM's moral standards and narrative expectations. Endings were softened, conflict contained, and ambiguity avoided. Stories were not meant to challenge audiences, but to reassure them. While this approach ensured consistency, it also limited experimentation. Grit, social realism, and psychological complexity, elements embraced by other studios, were often deemed too risky for the MGM brand. The star system, so effective on screen, placed heavy pressure on performers behind the scenes. Long contracts restricted choice, and carefully managed public images left little room for personal autonomy. For some, this structure provided security and fame. For others, it became suffocating. The cost of maintaining perfection was rarely visible to audiences, but it was deeply felt within the studio walls. Even technical excellence came with constraints. Directors known for bold visual styles were often reined in, their work adjusted to match the studio's preferred aesthetic. MGM valued polish over personality, uniformity over individual vision. Films looked beautiful, but they often looked similar. The illusion of effortless glamour was, in reality, the result of relentless control. Yet this system also explains MGM's enduring influence. By eliminating uncertainty, the studio delivered reliability. Audiences trusted MGM to provide quality, comfort, and emotional resolution. That trust became its greatest asset, and, eventually, its greatest vulnerability. As taste shifted and audiences began craving realism and risk, the same polish that once defined MGM would struggle to evolve. By the 1950s, the world that MGM had perfected was beginning to change. Television entered American homes, drawing audiences away from theaters and reshaping how stories were consumed. The carefully controlled studio system that once guaranteed success now struggled under rising costs and shrinking returns. Lavish productions, once MGM's greatest strength, became financial liabilities in a rapidly shifting industry. The breakup of long-term talent contracts marked a turning point. Stars were no longer bound to a single studio, and filmmakers began seeking greater creative freedom. New voices emerged, grittier, more personal, and less interested in idealized worlds. MGM, built on consistency and polish, found itself out of step with a generation that wanted realism over reassurance. Cost-cutting measures followed. Sets were dismantled, backlots sold, and the grandeur that once defined MGM slowly faded. The studio continued to produce films, but the unified identity that had shaped its golden age was gone. What remained was a name heavy with history, struggling to redefine itself in an era that no longer rewarded certainty. Yet MGM's influence did not disappear, it dispersed. The principles of studio perfected became the foundation of modern cinema. Star-driven marketing, event filmmaking, emotional clarity, and visual spectacle all trace their lineage back to MGM's storytelling philosophy. Even films that reject classical structure often do so in response to the standards MGM established. Today, MGM exists more as a legacy than an empire. Its lion still roars, not as a symbol of dominance, but as a reminder of a time when cinema believed in elegance, control, and the power of carefully crafted dreams. MGM may no longer define Hollywood, but Hollywood still carries its DNA. Proof that some stories never truly end, they simply change form. Interesting trivia is the iconic MGM lion is often thought of as a single symbol, but in reality, several lions were used over the studio's history. The most famous, known as Leo, debuted in 1957, while earlier versions appeared silently during the silent film era. Despite the roar-suggesting sound, the lion's image became iconic before audiences ever heard it. Although Gone with the Wind is widely associated with MGM, the film was actually produced by David O. Selznick. MGM's involvement came through its distribution power, financing support, and, most importantly, its stars. Clark Gable's casting was a condition of MGM's participation, demonstrating how tightly the studio controlled its most valuable assets. MGM was responsible for more Academy Award wins than any other studio during Hollywood's golden age. However, the studio rarely emphasized innovation. Many technical breakthroughs credited to MGM were refinements rather than inventions, reinforcing its reputation as a studio that perfected systems rather than reinvented them. One of MGM's most profitable films, The Wizard of Oz, was initially considered a financial disappointment. Its true cultural and economic value only emerged years later through television broadcasts, proving that some of MGM's most enduring stories outlived the era that created them. Despite its glamorous image, MGM was notoriously cautious with risk. Films that challenged social norms or featured morally ambiguous endings were often softened or rejected entirely. This conservative approach preserved the studio's brand, but may have prevented it from evolving faster when Hollywood itself began to change. MGM's famous motto, Ars Gratia Artis, was not chosen as a marketing phrase, but as a philosophical shield. While other studios openly chased profits, MGM positioned itself as a guardian of artistic prestige. Even as it ran one of the most tightly controlled, profit-driven systems in Hollywood. The contradiction was intentional, and it worked. The studio maintained one of the largest permanent music departments in film history. Composers, arrangers, and full orchestras were kept on staff, allowing MGM to produce scores at an industrial pace. This is why MGM films developed a recognizable emotional sound, lush, confident, and unmistakably cinematic. Many MGM films were rehearsed more like stage productions than movies. Musical numbers were often perfected weeks before cameras rolled, with choreography locked down to the smallest detail. Improvisation was rare. What audiences experienced as effortless joy was a result of exhaustive repetition. MGM also played a quiet role in shaping the modern concept of the blockbuster. Long before the term existed, the studio understood that fewer, larger films could generate more cultural impact than a steady stream of smaller ones. This philosophy influenced how films were marketed as events rather than simple entertainment. Despite its polished image, MGM often reused sets, costumes, and even musical cues across productions. The illusion of endless wealth was sustained through careful recycling, a reminder that efficiency was just as important as extravagance. Finally, while MGM is remembered for optimism, many of its most enduring films carry undercurrents of melancholy. The longing in Meet Me in St. Louis, the uncertainty beneath Sing in the Rain, and the bittersweet tone of The Wizard of Oz reflect a studio that understood escapism worked best when grounded in emotional truth. Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer may no longer dominate Hollywood the way it once did, but its influence is woven into every frame of modern cinema. The studio taught the world how to dream bigger, how to craft spectacle without losing heart, and how to shape stories that feel timeless. MGM didn't just make films. It curated experiences, engineered emotions, and built stars into legends. Its lion still roars, not simply as a logo, but as a symbol of an era when movies were promises. Promises of beauty, romance, adventure, and hope. Every sweeping musical number, every meticulously lit drama, every epic spectacle carries traces of MGM's philosophy. That storytelling is an art, and that art deserves scale, polish, and reverence. Even as tastes have changed, the DNA of MGM remains. Star-driven narratives, visual grandeur, and emotionally satisfying arcs continue to define Hollywood storytelling. And perhaps that is the studio's greatest achievement. Not just the films it created, but the way it taught audiences to feel the power of cinema. In the end, MGM's story is a reminder that movies are more than entertainment. They are crafted dreams, carefully designed to lift, to move, and to endure. The lion may have been tamed in modern times, but its roar, the echo of ambition, spectacle, and artistry, resonates still. As long as audiences continue to watch, the story of Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer will never truly fade.